Good evening and a very warm welcome to First Issues. After close to a decade of negotiations, Botswana finally signed an amended version of the Southern African Development Community or SADC's Gender Protocol in May this year, which the government said had more realistic goals than earlier versions. This lifted the questions regarding Botswana's commitment to gender parity that had plagued this country as a result of this refusal to sign. Although the country has had a good reputation with regards to the implementation of gender equality and women empowerment initiatives that are higher than the regional standard. Why is gender equality a topic of discussion on a business program, you may ask? This is because, as articulated best by the United Nations Development Programme, ending all forms of discrimination against women and girls is not only a basic human right, but it is also crucial to accelerating sustainable development. It has been proven time and time again that empowering women and girls has a multiplier effect and helps drive up economic growth and development across the board. In essence, fa o thusa mme, o thusa lelapa. Women the world over have historically been disadvantaged with regards to access to education, employment, equal pay, ownership of land, and so forth, essentially being rendered second-class citizens as a result of varied and restrictive social practices. Botswana has had cultural practices banning women from inheriting land overturned and is seen as progressive in terms of policies regarding equality. Land, of course, being the first of the four factors of production in economics, alongside labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Yet, as discussed last week, there are various programs looking to promote the economic empowerment of women, the effectiveness of which we discussed with outgoing Business Botswana President Lekwalo Leta Musienyane. One may ask, do women in this country need economic empowerment?
Well, I think everybody in this world can do with a bit of a handout. Women in particular, as I said earlier on, everybody really can do with a handout. If you have a reason why a specific gender or a specific sector in the economy needs that handout, it should be properly motivated for, managed, and done in such a way that it doesn't actually turn around and bite the very people. That if you do it in a condescending manner, which I often see throughout the world, then women of valor, women who are themselves in their own right. I mean, I've been in the same class with women who are better than everybody in the class, who really are outstanding, the outliers of the women. You are not doing them a favor, because it's almost like they arrived where they are through condescension.
This conversation led to a discussion amongst ourselves as to whether these types of programs are still necessary. Whether the Botswana woman of today is still in need of economic empowerment.
Yes, they do need economic empowerment because, we obviously need to look at it much broader than we usually do. Just look at macroeconomics, right? Look at the macro level in terms of where women are. Who are in the big businesses? Where are the women in the big businesses? I'm one person that will say that opportunities in Botswana have grown for both women and men. And the policies are clear that it's opportunities for both women and men. But we also know there are certain socioeconomic, sometimes political factors that influences your access. Access is one thing, but actually basically taking advantage of the opportunity and doing a business, because I'll stick to the business area, because employment is another aspect of it, is another milestone process. Because you need to know that if you go into manufacturing, for example, because Botswana's policy is about economic diversification, which will basically boost our economic growth. So what we are saying is that if we have to do economic diversification, we need to look at what is there and who is there and where are they. who have the skills, who have the capacity, so that we know that most women sit in the informal sector, in the small business sector. And a lot of women are there because they've been there for generations. We know, as we grow up in Botswana, who are the business people in our villages, in our cities, in terms of really providing services that the ordinary person needs, are women to a large extent. Nowadays, of course, with the unemployment problem, we have a lot of young women and young men getting into the informal sector and getting into the small business sector. But there's a disconnect between your informal small business sector and your macroeconomic big business sector. Economic diversification areas are manufacturing, tourism, agriculture, ICT, and the service sector. And we are saying if women have to access the opportunities, the big opportunities, we need to empower them economically by making sure policies are gender sensitive.
It's time for a short break, but when we return, we continue our conversation on the economic empowerment of women and young girls. Welcome back to First Issues, as Elsie Alexander continues to give us her views as to whether women and young girls in Botswana still need economic empowerment. Mrs. Alexander feels that only policy intervention will allow women to enter into arenas where there's currently little participation by them, because normal capitalist or social norms will not prioritize gender equality in the same way. She goes on to list some of the hurdles the female entrepreneur is faced with.
The first challenge you need to overcome is collateral, security. So you get a loan or you get a grant, if there's a grant, but also they will put you through a process, which a lot of women find very difficult because they don't have the necessary goods or the necessary conditions for them to access some of the economic opportunities. So we are saying yes, we still need to look at women, but now we've shifted to say we need to include young women and men because of the unemployment problem that we have right now. In other words, the context, when I was very active, for example, in the women's movement, at the beginning in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there were a lot of challenges for both women and men because the economic opportunities were just opening up, and there was a lot of talk about diversifying, but diversification was difficult. But most of our women and men sit in the agricultural sector, for example, and there are many challenges there. Women have some land in the agricultural sector, but for them to capitalize on that land, for them to utilize the land, they've got to go through a process where they need to overcome size of land. Most of them have small pieces of land. They need to overcome, as I say, the capital, the access to credit, the access to technology. A lot of them use very rudimentary traditional technology. They don't have the means or the access to the means of resources in order to enable them to operate at another level. I think research has shown in a lot of African countries and developing countries, the informal sector will actually diversify Botswana's economy. So we need to look there and not look at the big businesses only and say, how do we elevate the informal sector to a level, medium and then big, where they can actually assist government achieve its objectives of economic diversification. And I am saying you still need to empower them through skills, through technology, through access to land, access to credit, access to capital, so that they utilize the available opportunities, adequately and efficiently.
What if one were to argue that the same impediments facing women are the same facing men, so there shouldn't be any special treatments for females in this day and age?
If you look at let me just give you some statistics, okay? This is a 2014 study on the SADC Gender Protocol for Botswana, because every year we do an assessment to see where the men, where the women. It's relative, and depending on where you are, whether you go to Kowloon, whether you're in rural areas or whether you're in urban areas, whether you're in Maun, whether you're in Khansi, there are differences. So you may find that rural women have more challenges than urban women. So we should not locate our arguments looking at the urban women. We should say, where are the women in Botswana, rural and urban? And I can tell you that even though we have the opportunities out there, even though the policies are basically trying to create the conducive environment, a lot of the policies are not gender sensitive. And what I mean by that is that they don't necessarily take into account the special needs of women and men. And I'm saying and men, because we do have special needs, but we have different special needs. As I said, a young man may have access to land, a young woman may not have access to land. Yeah? A young man may be more able to have access to technology, a young woman may not be able to have that. And if you look at the research that was done, it's exactly that situation. We are saying you've got to make it gender appropriate and sensitive in order for you to capture or in order for you to address the special needs that women and men have in our economy. We find that even though we have moved quite a bit in the last 10 years of seeing women in corporate organizations, they are in boards, they lead very powerful organizations. I mean, you look at BFIM, for example, or you look at some of the Botswana Life, some of these big insurance companies, there are women there. But we are also saying having women at the top does not necessarily mean that they do have influence. It depends on where they sit. It depends on how they are able to negotiate a particular dispensation for women or men. Some women are there, they're not necessarily looking at whether this policy is gender sensitive. They are saying our organization is about profit making. So whoever helps us achieve our goals of profit making, this is where we want to go. So if you look at the public sector, for example, in terms of economic decision making, only 29% of those women that are there are actually participating in decision making in the economy. But also you need to look at to what extent do they have influence. In other words, if I say NDP 11, we're now at NDP 11, this is what the policy says. To what extent can I tweak the policy in such a way that it benefits both women and men? Do I have the power? Do I have the influence? You can say yes, some do, but to a large extent it is male-driven. A lot of men had organizations or had the public sector ministries, right, as ministers. As you know, we only, how many ministers do we have in Botswana? Only 4. We have Ma Makatu, we have Ma Tshireletso, we have Ma Venson, we have Ma Da. And where do they sit? One is in foreign affairs, one is in education, one is in health, the other is in local government. Who is in the economy? Those are services related to the economy that we need, but you really need to be at the heart of where economic decisions are made for you to make a difference. And if you are sensitive to those needs, you are able to make those differences.
Mrs. Alexander says that sound consultation needs to be in place for the issues on the ground to be well understood to enable effective interventions to take place.
What you need to do is basically consult the women themselves who are in the informal sector, who are in the business sector. For example, Women in Business Association, right, is one organization that has been there for a long time, assisting women with businesses, giving women micro finance or assisting them with some of the challenges that they have. But a lot of them grow, but they are growing very slowly. A lot of them do see that there's an opportunity there. But we need to get your banks. I just had a woman about a couple of weeks ago who called me, and I'll give you a practical example, who said, Ma Alexander, I am asking for a loan from the bank. The bank says my husband should sign. But I'm divorcing this husband at this point in time. How does he sign my loan? How does he sign, the papers for me to get a loan? Now the banks don't know that the laws have also changed to some extent. Whereas a woman, you can get access to a loan whether married or not. Yeah? So you have those kind of challenges where institutions are not sensitive. SEDA recently, and I'm glad they did, and I want to commend SEDA. In fact, I heard the CEO on radio not so long ago, and he was very passionate about assisting Botswana get into business at all levels. They've just introduced a facility for small businesses. I think it's fantastic because that's a stepping stone for you to go to medium business or to go to a large business. And we need to encourage that. We need to get policies to respond to that, to say if Botswana have to drive this economy, because even men say Botswana are not driving this economy. Who is driving this economy? We are there, but we're at different levels, okay? So if we as citizens have to drive this economy, and citizens, I mean both women and men, we need to create an environment where it facilitates this process. And I think for a long time, we've struggled with citizen empowerment. Certainly we talk about it, but we don't translate that into actual conducive policies, conducive laws, conducive service institutions, or institutions that can assist us get to a level where we can really take advantage of the opportunities in Botswana and elsewhere that we can do business. As you know, we've got a small market. If you go in a big agricultural business or manufacturing business, you've got to export. You can't depend on the local market. Now, for you to do that, you really need to know and be aware and have a supportive environment that will enable you to get to that level. And I am saying that it's much more difficult, and it still is, for women to get to that level because of the many challenges that they are facing. And I talked about basically productive resources that you need, resources that you really need to make sure that you've got all the ingredients that will take you to a level where you do a big manufacturing business.
We have been speaking about the female entrepreneur in general, but the dynamics at work in places such as Middlepits or Mokobeng vary greatly from those in urban centers such as Gaborone and Francistown. Are the hurdles our guest has described faced by women in urban or rural settlements in this country?
This is applying to both rural and urban women. The urban women have an advantage because the facilities, the services, everything is here. Like I know there are some women that are now in jewelry, right? In the diamond industry. There are some that are actually in the diamond industry participating, with the opportunities there. But there are very few. And if you just look at that area and assess it in terms of, since we've opened up beneficiation, who is there? Who is taking advantage of this? There are, as I say, few women there, but the majority are male. And we are saying it's because they have an upper hand. They have a much more, they have much more ability and capacity to access those opportunities. If you look at the younger generation, women and men, you may argue both of them have challenges. I would agree with that. But I also say that we then need to look at who inherits property from the family. Yeah? Because it starts there. Who inherits the land? Who inherits the business? Who inherits whatever it is that your family has? Okay? That level. But you can also look at the issue of how far have they gone in terms of education. A lot of girls these days, and it's amazing, drop out of school in our school system.
Men, more than boys?
Much more than boys. But there are other challenges that boys also face that we need to look at. So the economy, you also then need to look at your education system. Is what areas of degrees do women have in the education system? Mostly your social sciences. What areas of degrees do men have? Your science and technology are predominantly male. And the opportunities may be more in science and technology, or maybe even related to agriculture, than in the soft sciences, which is your social science. There's an in terms of numbers, you have more graduates coming out of humanities, out of social science, out of education, areas that are oversubscribed in terms of jobs. And this is why we probably have the unemployment situation in our country. So I think for young women and men, we also need to do, and as a researcher, you really need to do a very qualitative and a very robust analysis of what do we have in terms of skills and who sits there, where are the women, where are the men, and then we need to develop your policy around those issues of research or what the research tells you. We are not very good at using data, Botswana, not very good at using research to inform our policies. We try, but I think we can do much more. In order for you to address the education crisis we have now, you've got to do research. You can't just visit schools and say, I've seen what the problem is, or talk to teachers. You've got to do proper qualitative research to understand the major social challenges that are happening in our schools in order to correct or to adjust your policy. The same with economics. You've got to understand the global challenges, you've got to understand the regional challenges, you've got to understand the local challenges. And the only way you're going to understand that is by doing research or analyzing existing data. And I think we need to up our game as far as that one is concerned, in order for us to understand why are we still talking about the importance of empowerment of women and girls in the economy and in the education sector.
Let's move this conversation over to our social media pages, because when we return after the break, we have some important advice for business people of all genders. Thank you for staying with us as we now continue our series unpacking the roles of the various stakeholders involved in the management of our pensions with the help of pensions expert Edna Dambe. Tonight she discusses the role of the administrator, whom she describes as the engine room of any pension fund.
The administrator is by far most key because they register the member on board, they monitor, they receive the contributions of the member every single month, from the member and from the employer on behalf of the member. They record the activities of the member. If a member leaves the fund, say, for a period of 3 years because they've gone to school and it has affected their contributions because they're on half pay or whatever, all of this has to be accurately captured and stored. So the record keeping of a fund is most important. If somebody comes through 25 years later and says, my information does not add up, it is the administrator who needs to come up with the information and say, according to our data, this is what we recorded along the way.
In Botswana, we find that the role of the benefit consultant and administrator is combined, meaning that solutions are limited to what the two administrators we currently have can provide. Next week, we learn about those tasked with investing and growing our money in this continuing series. It is now, however, good night from me, Namita Samakula, and the First Issues team.